All right, on your desk, you should have an article that says, what are biological hotspots? If you need one, let me know. Anyone need one? All right, follow along with me. So it says, what are biological hotspots? In an effort to save what is left of Earth's biodiversity, conservation biologists have identified biodiversity hotspots, or areas that are especially rich in plant and animal species that are found nowhere else on the planet. It's important to realize that not all of the Earth's species of plants and animals are distributed equally. In fact, much of the diversity is concentrated into a small percentage of countries, most of which have large amounts of tropical forests. The country with the highest diversity is Indonesia, followed by Colombia, Mexico, Brazil, and Ecuador. And unfortunately, economic prosperity is not associated with high biodiversity. In fact, generally speaking, the better off a country is financially, the lower the diversity it has. In an effort to save what is left of Earth's biodiversity, conservation biologists have identified biodiversity hotspots, or areas that are especially rich in plant and animal species that are found nowhere else on the planet. Often, these species are in critical danger of extinction or ecological disruption due to population growth, human development, and habitat loss. And because they occur in countries stricken with few financial resources, it can be difficult to establish protected areas and enforce conservation measures. However, considering the wealth of biodiversity at risk in these areas, it is essential to find strategies for successful management and protection. These hotspots cover 2% of Earth's surface, so they don't cover very much of Earth's surface, but they have up to 50% of all species of plants and terrestrial organisms, including birds, mammals, reptiles, and amphibians. According to the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, IUCN, you'll see that abbreviation other places, they are also home for a large majority of the world's endangered or threatened organisms. While identifying and protecting biodiversity hotspots is a very important aspect of conservation, experts warn that it isn't enough. All the world's ecosystems, regardless of species counts, must be sustained and protected since they are all interconnected. All right, I will give you a second. What you need to do is answer the 3 questions at the bottom. What are biological hotspots? Why are they important? And what do you notice on the map? I did have you answer what do you notice on the map for, I know I've seen you, or I've had you look at that map previously, so. So biological hotspots, that you just had to find the definition on there. Why would biological hotspots be important? Anyone? Okay, so they're home to endangered species. They provide, you could talk about, they provide services for humans. They provide habitat for other animals. And then what do we notice about where they're located? Okay, roughly around the equator. There's lots of right answers. What did they talk about? What kind of countries did they talk about them being a lot in? Poorer countries, right? So like developing countries. So a lot of them are in developing countries, and that's why they said that typically the more industrialized or the more developed a country gets, the fewer areas there are, because so much of that space is being filled up then with homes and with businesses, and all of those natural areas have been developed. You'll also notice a lot of them are along coasts. They said a lot of them belong in tropical forest areas, so that's why a lot of them are around the equator. So we've been talking about biodiversity, so this is just one thing to keep in mind when we're talking about biodiversity. There are areas on the planet that have more biodiversity than others, and you guys know that. What's the most biodiverse ecosystem in the world? Tropical rainforest is the terrestrial one. Coral reefs are the most of all, okay, even more than tropical rainforest. But if we're talking just terrestrial, then it would be tropical rainforest. All right, can you guys do me a favor and find this article and pass it up, the one you just looked at? So what I want to do, I want to review a little bit, but first, does anyone else have the ornament sheet? Because they weren't here. Anyone have that ornament worksheet they need to give to me? If you do, put it in my basket. Does anyone have the multiple choice for Chapter 18? I had said it was due today. Again, these are just loose due dates because I don't really mark anything late, but I had put it as today. So if you have it done, you can turn it in. If you don't, like, just do it at some point. You don't need to, like, hastily do it right now. Anyone have if you have the multiple choice for Chapter 18, you can just put it in the basket. If you do, does anyone need another multiple choice? Anyone need another multiple choice? Okay. So again, just if you didn't do the multiple choice, just get those to me by Thursday if you want them for the test. I had sent an email. I had sent an email saying that your test was going to be on Friday, but after thinking about it today, I was like, well, that seems a little fast, so I'll move it to Monday. Yep. Yep, so we will be reviewing on Friday then. And if you already worked on the review, great, you can have a study hall, or we can work on the free responses, because you're going to have your first free response question on Monday's test. So it'll be like 30 multiple choice, so same as normal. But the thing is, we have 2 chapters now, right? These are smaller chapters. And then you'll have a free response question. So we'll go over that when it gets closer. Review here. So I wanted to review some of the concepts that we had talked about. So I have some flashcards. So first flashcard, species richness. Who can tell me what species richness? You have any? Okay, the number of different species, right? So if I have an alligator, a cat, and a flamingo, right? That would be 3 different species. So that would be my species richness. How many different species are there? It doesn't matter the number. It's just how many different ones do we have. Species evenness, right? That's how even they are, right? Do we have 20 and 20 and 20? Or do we have 1, 5, and 200? Okay, so how even they are. What's a mutation? Change in DNA, change in DNA, right? So then when we're talking, the next card is evolution. What's evolution? Change over time. And a lot of times we're talking about genetic change over time because we're typically not seeing like a species like morph and evolve over time. So a lot of times we're talking about genetic or DNA changes over time, but we can be talking about at the species level as well. Artificial selection. Okay, humans select for traits. So what are some organisms they might use this with? Cows, crops, dogs, horses. Okay, good. Natural selection. You guys always want to tell me survival of the fittest. What does that mean? Which organisms end up surviving? Is it always the strong ones? No. Best adapted to their environment, right? And so even if an organism is the strongest, but it's hot pink and it lives in the desert, it's probably not going to survive, right? So the key here is that it has to do with the environment, right? So the environment can change. So if the environment changes, the traits that might be the best adapted might change as well. What do we need in order for natural selection to happen? Can my population be exactly the same? No. Okay, so we have to have variation. So I had taught my students, not all of you got this, but VISA, some people teach other acronyms, but the V stands for variation. If I have a population of clones, natural selection can't act on them because none of those clones are the fittest. They're all the same. So they're either all going to survive or they're all going to die. Right? The idea behind natural selection is that the most fit ones are going to survive. Right? When we went outside and we did the worms, the ones that best blended into their environment ended up surviving. So we have to have variation. The I stands for inheritance, right? So the traits have to be able to be inherited. It can't just be like, oh, I'm going to go be a bodybuilder and then pass on my bodybuilding traits to my child. Okay? That's not going to work that way, right? They have to be inherited. S is for selection, right? So some are selected. And then A is for adaptation. Over time, we see that the population adapts or changes. Gene flow. This one's easy if you break down the words. What does it sound like? What does flow mean? To move. Okay, so genes are moving from one population to another, right? Because in order for us to have genes, we have to have organisms. Do you guys remember the Carolina Panthers? They brought in those 8 other panthers. Okay, when they brought in those 8 panthers, those panthers had genes. They brought them into that population. They introduced new genes to them. That's gene flow. All right, range of tolerance. Pretty self-explanatory, right? It's how much our organism can tolerate, right? So some organisms have a really wide range of tolerance. Think about the temperatures that like a snowshoe hare can survive. Really, really cold and pretty warm temperatures. What about a coral? Coral reef? Okay, it's got a pretty low or small or narrow range of tolerance because it can't tolerate those different temperatures. All right, we have 2 different niches, fundamental and realized. Anyone remember which one's smaller? So the realized. Realize is like actual, okay? So fundamental niche is the niche that it would have. Remember all of its feeding habitats and the places it can occupy and when it eats. It's really, really big. So maybe I could ideally eat at any time of the day, go to bed at any time, but I have a roommate, right? And so I have to make sure I get up at reasonable hours so I don't wake up my roommate, right? So the realized niche is going to be smaller, okay? Because there's competition and there's other species that use the environment at different times of the day. All right, we have niche specialist and niche generalist. Can anyone tell me, we talked about a niche being like the habitat and what food it eats and when it eats. Specialist, who can give me an example? What kind of organism is a very big specialist? Okay, koalas, because they only eat the eucalyptus leaves. I think they eat eucalyptus. Okay, koalas, right? Or pandas, they only eat bamboo. Or, you know, that orchid mantis that we talked about that only lives in a certain place. What about a generalist? What eats a lot of stuff? Okay, raccoons, rats, right? So those would be examples of specialists. 6th mass extinction. When is it happening? Right now. What's causing it? Humans, okay? All right, we have different levels of biodiversity. Can you name one? Blank diversity, blank diversity. What do we got? Genetic diversity? Species diversity? ecosystem diversity, right? So genetic means there's lots of different genes. Species means there's lots of different species. And ecosystem means lots of different ecosystems. All right, bottleneck effect. What do we know about a bottleneck? The neck of a bottle. What's its size? Small, right? So the bottle is big, and then it gets small. So what happens to my population if I have a bottleneck effect? It gets smaller, right? Because there's some event, like a tornado or some event makes them smaller. This is what happened with the Carolina Panthers. They got really, really small. And typically this reduces genetic variation. All right, we have two types of speciation, or ways that species form. We have sympatric and allopatric. What does sim mean? Same. So this is, they're forming new species, but they live in the same area. So they're not separated geographically, they're separated reproductively, right? So maybe they breed at different times or they flower at different times. Allopatric speciation is the same thing as geographic speciation, okay, or physical separated species. So species become two separate species because they're physically separated. What's the animal group with the most endangered species? Amphibians. Good. Species that are likely to go extinct, what kind of characteristics do they have? Okay, so niche specialists. Small range of tolerance. Where are they likely to be found? Not a lot of places. Okay, so they have a limited range. What about reproducing? Reproductive rate. Slow, right? So they take a long time to reproduce. They have value to humans. Good. All right. Here's what I would like you to do. So we've been talking about endangered species. I'm going to give you a group. And what you need to do, if you don't remember which endangered species you had, I have the list up here. I'm going to give you a group. With your group, you're going to look at your species. Each person had one species. You're going to write on a whiteboard, after talking about it and talking about everybody's species, which species you would save if you had money. Okay, so you need to rank them in order of which one you would save first. Okay, so the next thing I need you to find is the spotted owl article on your table. Anyone need one? What are all these people like kidnap my articles? I don't understand what happens to them. All right, so we're going to talk about this endangered species. It's the northern spotted owl. So follow along with me as I read through this. This spotted owl is found in Oregon. Okay, what do we know about Oregon? Rainy. Okay, so what's the biome? It's a temperate rainforest, okay? So temperate because it's not in the tropics, and rainforest because it rains a ton, right? And there's tons of trees. So the northern spotted owl lives there. What do we know about what kind of stuff do they harvest a lot of in Oregon? Trees, okay, lumber. That's a problem because this owl needs trees in order to live. So he's become endangered, and it's been this whole big political thing from the 1980s. And there's all these activist groups that are trying to save it, and it's made the news. This guy, Spotted Owl, was super famous. He made the front cover of Time magazine. We will find out. So its scientific name is Strix occidentalis. It is 18 inches in length, 42-inch wingspan. So its habitat, lower elevation coniferous forest. What is a coniferous tree or coniferous forest? What kind of tree? Pine trees, right? Ones that have cones. Especially old growth. What do we think an old growth forest is? Yeah, like really big trees. I don't know the exact definition. It might be 100 years or more, but it hasn't been cut in any recent amount of time, right? So forests could have like big trees or normal sized trees, but a lot of the forests around here have been cut at least like once, okay? These are forests that haven't been cut in a long time. And they actually won't really live in any forests that have been cut recently. So it is a state and federally threatened species. So on this article, just follow along with me, it says, with the 1990 appearance on the cover of Time magazine, the spotted owl is one of the best-known species in Oregon and remains the iconic poster child of old-growth forest protection. Medium in size, the Strix occidentalis, that's its scientific name, is dark brown with white spots that give the owl its name. Dense, mature coniferous forests are this nocturnal woodland owl's habitat of choice. In Oregon, spotted owls typically occupy Douglas firs, grand firs, ponderosa pines, and incense cedars. The flying squirrels, wood rats, and red tree voles that share the forest with the spotted owl make up the bulk of its diet, along with other small mammals, birds, and reptiles. Spotted owls are known to be relatively tame birds, often unfazed by the presence of humans. Although the spotted owl has been protected under the Endangered Species Act since 1990, its fight for ecological stability is ongoing. Persistent logging in western Oregon is steadily destroying the spotted owl's habitat, causing the species numbers to decline. Although old-growth logging has slowed, due in part to President Clinton's Northwest Forest Plan, the population continues to dwindle. Another cause for concern is the increased competition for habitat and prey the spotted owl faces from the barred owl. The more aggressive barred owl is not native to the Pacific Northwest. Its original range was from Florida north to Maine, but by the 1990s, barred owls started to take over spotted owl nest sites in Washington and Oregon. This increased competition, in conjunction with habitat loss due to logging, has resulted in some populations of spotted owls dropping to half of what they were in the 1980s, when the fight to save the bird began. Oregon Wild's fight, so this is an activist group, Oregon Wild, their fight for designated wilderness areas and roadless areas devoid of logging is necessary for this bird's survival. So, I have this really bad video, but I just want to show you the spotted owl. And then we have, so this is like the spotted owl. We also have the barred owl. And the barred owl is actually one of the biggest threats to the spotted owl. So here's our spotted owl. And it will actually, it's super, super aggressive. So if we think about niches, right, we talked about niche overlap, how if they're overlapping too much, typically one organism is going to drive the other to extinction, or just, you know, outcompete the other. And so that's what's happening here, is one species is being more aggressive than the other, and it's driving the other one kind of to extinction. And so this is an ongoing battle. They've protected some of this forest, and originally logging was the threat, and now we have this other barred owl coming in, and it's kind of taking over, and it's still causing this spotted owl to be threatened. So something to think about, causes for species extinctions can change over time, okay? All right, do me a favor, pass those forward. I need you to get out your notes packet. If you need a notes packet, I have one. So I gave this, I think, the notes packet is from, I think, Friday, Thursday or Friday. Either way, I can get out some more if you don't know if you have it. All right, anyone need a note packet? Okay. This is chapter 18. Okay. All right, so chapter 18, we were talking about endangered species. What we're going to look at now is we're going to look at why we should preserve species, okay? So we know that they provide ecosystem services to humans, okay? We call this instrumental value. If ecosystems have value to humans, we call it instrumental value because they're valuable as an instrument to humans, okay? These different ecosystem services we can divide up into different categories. Now, different books and different resources categorize them differently. So I would not imagine, some of these are the same, some of them are a little different. I can't imagine them asking you a question like this on the AP exam, but you still need to know it. So provisions, those are things that you can touch and hold, okay? Things like lumber, food, medicine. We also rely on them. Here's where these you'll hear called different things. So we're just going to say they're regulating or support services. Sometimes you'll see them divided out separately. Your book divides them out separately. Really, it's just really confusing. So we're just going to put them all together. So for example, they could regulate the carbon cycle or water cycle. They help by pollinating. They provide habitat. They filter out pathogens. What's a pathogen? Pathogen is a disease-causing organism. So our wetlands help filter out disease-causing organisms. So does our soil. So we'll call those the same, regulating and support services. Cultural services, so beauty, recreation, some spiritual. So this is when we're talking about like, oh, parks for people to go camping, or maybe there is a nature area that a religious group uses, something like that. They also provide us with resilience, right? What's resilience? If an ecosystem's resilient, what can it do? Bounce back from disturbances, so it can recover quickly from disturbances. They provide us monetary value for different things. We can charge to have people go in them, for tourism. We can charge people for the services they provide or the provisions they provide. So if we look, here is an infographic that kind of shows you the differences here. Notice they call them regulating. Supporting is in there as well. Provisioning, right? So what are things that they give us that are tangible for the most part? And then cultural. So using these three, see if you can fill in those blanks at the bottom of your sheet. So for the first one in your note packet, we have large forest stores carbon. That would be regulating. Okay, so for the first one, number 1, regulating. 2, rainforest provides opportunities for children to play and learn. That would be cultural. Okay, so number 2 on your note packet is cultural. Number 3, bamboo provides an eco-friendly option for flooring. So flooring would be provisioning. Wetlands provide water purification and prevention of erosion. Regulating. Oceans provide shrimp and shellfish for human consumption. Provisioning. Bees provide pollination of crops. That would be regulating. And northern lakes provide places for cabins. That would be cultural. All right, so the last question here, if you ever take a philosophy class or an environmental ethics class, you might spend some time talking about this. I took a couple of them in college, but you'll read there's a lot of different people who have different views, and one of the things that you'll talk about is why should we save the environment? Sure, it has value to humans, but one of the things you'll talk about is if there weren't any humans on this planet, would we still want to save the environment? So what they're trying to get at is, do ecosystems have intrinsic value? And the idea of intrinsic value is value independent of any benefit to humans. So we can say, sure, they provide us with carbon cycling, and they provide us with lumber and beauty. Would we save them, or should we save them, even if they don't give us any benefit? And why or why not? So just some food for thought to think about there. So we have about 8 minutes left. If you did not finish the multiple choice, why don't you see if you can do some of that right now? Otherwise, if you flip your review, you can do a lot of this review already. Like number 9 and 10 are pretty easy. If you want to flip to the second page and do 9 and 10, you should be able to get those done in like 2 minutes, and they're pretty easy. They don't require a lot of brain power. Okay. If I give you one and you don't need one because you already printed it, just put it back on my table or leave it there and I'll correct it. So multiple choice, and then otherwise I want you working. See if you can do numbers 9 and 10 on here. If you want to do more, great.